Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some PathOfExile discussion. Welcome to day 7 of Teaser Season for patch 3.25 and the upcoming Settlers of Kalguur expansion. Today, we're going to be talking about Blight and some changes that were announced for the League mechanic, in particular a new reward that's going to come out of it. I would just first mention though, I'll apologise in advance, I'm feeling a bit sick at the moment, so you'll probably hear my voice sounding a little bit off and my face definitely looks a bit off. I'm more feeling off colour than terrible, and hopefully I'll be fine in a few days' time, because spoiler season is going to be heating up in the next week as we get closer to the main livestream announcement. The announcement that was made today is pretty quick and compact, but has a lot to break down, so we're going to have a look at this firstly. A new oil is being added, it's called the Prismatic oil, and it's going to come from Blighted maps and Blight Ravaged maps. This is then going to empower new anointments that are not something that are currently available on the passive tree. They'll be things that are secret anoints, much like the existing Vengeant Cascade. Vengeant Cascade, many of you may remember, was extremely overpowered a couple of leagues ago. It then got nerfed and no one uses it anymore, but returning projectile support was added and has a lot of the behaviour that you used to get from Vengeant Cascade, just at a more reasonable power level. It's my speculation the Prismatic oil will be quite rare. Grinding Gear Games have said it only comes from Blighted maps and Blight Ravaged maps, and I think they're going to make it fairly rare because currently all of the existing oils in the game are something that anyone with a Blight focus can get pretty quickly, which means that in Trade League, which is what they balance around, they don't have a huge value. Getting a gold oil is certainly something you're happy to see, but it's not something that's an amazing drop, and I think they might be trying to add an amazing drop to Blight that is less exclusive than stranglegRasp, the item that drops only very rarely from Blight Ravaged maps. So that's my speculation. Of course I could be wrong, but I also think that the decision to name it Prismatic rather than just to pick another colour is also further evidence that they want this to feel special. We know exactly 2 of these new anointments. There is Incorporeal, which is a considerable buff if you are using the elusive mechanic. The way that elusive works, having a small amount of elusive on you is actually a drawback because it prevents you from restarting elusive back at full strength. With Incorporeal, it's going to fall off once it gets under 20% effect. While it's a very short-term nerf to your combat power, it will then allow you to get a new copy of elusive, which will start again at full power, potentially quite a bit over 100%. As a result, this will increase the average effective elusive on you by about 10%. So it's straight upside having it fall off. Elusive on you reducing in effect 50% slower makes elusive better for boss fights that go quickly, but it's not something that's massive, and it's not something that's necessarily always for the best. This is, in my opinion, a medium power anoint, but because we know it's going to be using one of the Prismatic oils, it could end up being quite expensive to apply. As a result, I don't expect to see it all that often. The next one, however, is quite a bit better. Mixed Munitions asks you to do something weird. It provides you 5% increased cooldown recovery rate for throwing traps per mine that you've detonated recently. Now, the number of mines you've detonated recently, i.e. within the last 4 seconds, is a stat you can scale really, really high with a bit of effort. I think there's a couple of main uses for this. Firstly, cooldown recovery rate for throwing traps is something that is only a useful stat if you're using one of the cooldown traps. Seismic Trap is arguably the most popular of these. There's also Flamethrower Trap, Lightning Spire Trap, and Lightning Spire Trap of Overloading, which is something that I quite like and feel is a bit underexplored at the moment. A really quick aside on Lightning Spire Trap of Overloading. There are a number of alternate ailments in the game: Brittle, Sap, and Scorch. These are potentially quite powerful, and they're quite difficult to inflict on enemies without the huge opportunity cost of taking Secrets of Suffering and locking yourself out of Freeze, Shock, and Ignite. Well, there is a way to do this, and that is Lightning Spire Trap of Overloading, a weapon that provides flat cold and or flat fire to spells, and Replica Malachai's Artifice. Because Lightning Spire Trap of Overloading has a 100% critical strike chance, as long as you don't nerf that with anything else on your character, this is then going to inflict those ailments on enemies, but it's going to do so without the regular Secrets of Suffering drawback, which is the ban on igniting or shocking or freezing with your own skills. So this is something that's a little bit of tech that you can keep in mind. Aside over, let's go back to talking about the new news. Let's go back to Mixed Munitions in general. This effectively grants you the entire benefit of advanced trap support applied to your cooldown traps, as long as you're willing to jump through the considerable hoops that Mixed Munitions asks of you. So you're going to need to be spamming mines on your character. You can spam these mines as an additional source of damage, or perhaps they're just there as a buff, or perhaps they're there as your primary clear skill, for example with Exsanguinate linked to them, while Seismic Trap is used for tankier rares and for big bosses. Lots of different options there. The last thing I think we want to really keep an eye out for, and this may not be something that we get information on for a little while, is exactly how these new prismatic oils are going to interact with a couple of things on the Atlas. Distilled Fungus allows Blight bosses in your maps to drop an additional anointed jewelry item. This can have any anointment in the game and they don't seem to be weighted. Most of the time you'll get a ring that doesn't require gold or silver oils and it ends up just being left on the ground. But sometimes you'll get something that requires a gold or a silver oil, and at that point it's time to pull out the oil extractors. Oil extractors allow you to harvest one of those oils out of one of the jewelry pieces that you've got. It's a bit random whether you get a good one or not, but this is going to get a lot better if prismatic oils are rare and if prismatic oils are added into the pool for Distilled Fungus. I want to also remind people that Sporeguard exists. Sporeguard is an item that people don't usually equip as is. Instead, what they do is they apply an anointment to it, then they Varlorb it, or even take it to the double corruption chamber, hoping that it becomes a rare item. And then if that happens, they then apply a tainted mythic orb to it, hoping that it becomes the Ivory Tower. This will then generate an Ivory Tower. They'll have a Blight anointment as an enchantment on it, which is often stronger than an Ivory Tower that has a particular heist enchantment on it. There's also a couple of other items that this can be done with as well. Kalguur the Thermophile, Chirophile, and Serunophile, Breath Stealer, and the Stampede. All of these items are Blight exclusive uniques that only come from Blighted maps, and all of them can have an anointment placed on them, which you can then potentially turn into a rare item and do further things with. Finally, of course, there is stranglegRasp, which is the big daddy of all of these items. It's an Onyx amulet that does nothing on its own, but it can have 3 additional enchantment modifiers, and once you've put the 4 enchantments on it, if you brick it into a rare item with a Varlorb or a double corruption chamber, it retains those 4 anointments. These are going to be hugely buffed by this addition of prismatic oils, assuming that the prismatic oil pool has anything good in it at all. The last thing we need to talk about though is opportunity cost. In general, you can only have 1 anointment on your character, and by default that is going to be one of Whispers of Doom, Sovereignty, Champion of the Cause, Influence, Charisma, or a couple of other aura related nodes, because those are so powerful in the 3.24 game. Whispers of Doom being the one that allows you to have 2 curses, which is something that's a bit different to all of the other really powerful nodes. And then of course your build also potentially has something that is build specific, like the node that gives Hexblast 50% increased area of effect, that may also be competing with these powerful aura nodes. All of these new amulet anoints are going to live or die based upon whether they can compete with these existing powerhouse nodes. So it'll be important to look through the patch notes and have a look. Are there any nerfs to Sovereignty, Whispers of Doom, and the like? If so, are they still so good they're going to be used anyway, or have they been Vengeance cascaded and removed from consideration for almost every build? After considering that, do you want to take a chance on making a build that feels like it's going to heavily rely upon one of these new prismatic oil enchants? Or are you someone who wants to play it a bit safe and make a first character that will work without something like mixed munitions, and then you can potentially swap to something like that as a bonus later on? Finally, I expect we'll probably get a data mined list of these at the very latest 12 to 15 hours before the league goes live, but I could be wrong there. Granny Gear Games might decide to keep them secret. They do, after all, term them new secret notables after all. So maybe we're not going to find out the details until someone gets into Standard, finds the first reflective oil, and then starts experimenting. And if there's a triple reflective oil anoint, it might take even longer. Unless, of course, people are able to simply vendor 3 gold oils into a prismatic oil, in which case most of them will be found within an hour or 2 of the league going live. Anyways, that is the buffs to Blight that are taking place in 3.25, or at least what we know of them so far. I'll leave you with one more reminder, and that is that in about 16 hours after this video goes live, streamer Jungron is going to be hosting a race to 4 Voidstones, which, if you're one of the best players in the game, will be a lot of fun to participate in. But even if you aren't participating, it'll be a really good source of information on builds that have been proven and tested in the 3.24 meta, many of which will likely survive into 3.25. May your Varlorbs have interesting results.